or in their training at least, they were excluded from the conversation, right? So you could say, look, this is going to really hurt the economy. And then what the response you'd get was, well, you care more about money than lives. And therefore you shouldn't do that. But the irony is that the economic harm from the lockdowns with 100% certainty killed more people and is still killing more people than the lives saved by the lockdowns, which I think are very few.
Yeah, well, we're not done with that yet. We have no idea how many people the lockdown and the associated panic killed. That'll unfold over probably
decades.
Yeah, well, especially when you factor in things like the decrement in educational attainment that emerged as a consequence of the suppression of schooling, because that's a whole lifetime of decreased economic productivity.
I cannot tell you how frustrated I was about this. So my training is I have an MD and a PhD in economics. I do health economics for a living. I've been following for the last 2 decades this literature obsessively documenting the returns to education on the health of children during their entire lives. And it's pretty convincing. It's a great investment we make when we educate our children in terms of, they live longer, healthier, more fulfilling lives. And even like small interruptions to the education is what the literature documented, have long lifetime consequences. This guy named Dimitri Kostakis, who's an editor of JAMA Pediatrics, did this really interesting paper. We just extrapolated that existing social science literature and said, well, we closed schools for a short time in spring 2020. What consequences will that have on the lifespans of children? And he estimated that we had essentially robbed children in the United States of 5.5 million life years just from the short interruption in spring of 2020. Well, schools closed on the basis of public health, this cartel of public health people all around the world. In Uganda, in India, the schools closed for 2 years. Many people don't have access to internet or electricity or whatever. That meant no school. And millions of kids.
It also meant no social interactions. It meant way more time online. It meant way more time frustrated.
Depression. One in 4 young adults seriously considered suicide in the U.S., and according to a CDC survey in June of 2020. The consequences are just, the knock-on consequences were devastating. The UN World Food Program was yelling as loud as it could that there were going to be millions, tens of millions of people on the brink of starvation as a consequence of the economic dislocation caused by the lockdown.
Supply chain disruptions, absolutely, yeah.
And the pointy end of the supply chain disruption is some guy who makes $5 a day or $10 a day of income selling coconuts to rich Mumbai, laptop class and that people, and then he loses his job. He now earns less than $2 a day of income. His family starves. So it was never lives versus money.
Never.
It was always lives versus lives. And if you talk to any competent social scientist, that's exactly what they would have told you in the early days of the pandemic.
So when did you
entirely predictable.
When did you start to become concerned about the overreach of the pandemic mandates? And tell me that story, and how did that unfold?
The day I heard about the lockdowns, I was absolutely floored. I couldn't believe that in medicine and public health we were recommending this approach that I knew with certainty was going to harm the lives of poor and vulnerable people literally everywhere in the world. I thought that we had made commitments to protect, almost these Rawlsian commitments to you structure public policy so that you don't harm the least capable among us to suffer from that. That
an extension of the Hippocratic Oath, right?
That's what I thought exactly, and I thought, okay, well, that's the profession I thought I was in. And then when the lockdowns were announced. Actually, I had an argument with my boss, who's in Stanford Medicine, almost that very day, because his wife is the head of Santa Clara County Public Health, and we had this argument about whether lockdowns were a good idea on the eve of the lockdown. I just came away stunned. Like this can't. And I actually gave an interview to a Reuters reporter who's doing a story on what lockdowns would do to kids, to domestic assault rates,
to alcoholism,
to depression,
opiate misuse,
alcoholism.
Yeah.
So I gave an interview in like April of 2020, and I emphasized these knock-on effects. I said they were certain to come. And I actually said in that interview that the lockdowns were very likely the biggest public health mistake we ever made.
Oh yeah, you think it's a bigger public health mistake than the inverted food pyramid and the injunction to everyone to do nothing but eat carbohydrates till they weigh 350 pounds? Or, I mean, no, you got to admit those at least compete for.
There are a lot of sins to weigh, but this is certainly up there.
Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of the catastrophic harm to poor people.
Yeah, and that's not done. We're
children.
not done with that. So everyone listening and watching needs to know that the catastrophic consequences of harm done to poor people are still unfolding, and God only knows what the end result of that's going to be. Because food is more expensive than it should have been, and energy is more expensive than it should have been. And there are multiple reasons for that, but the bloody supply chain disruptions were one of them. And we really toyed with bringing our supply chains to the brink of bloody disaster. It's still hard to buy a car in North America. And, it's really difficult to screw something up like that because we're pretty damn good at making cars and distributing them. And to see that there are shortages on all fronts for rich people. You just imagine what the shortages are like for poor people. So
yeah, the other thought I had very early on was that we didn't actually know how deadly the disease was.
Right.
So in during the swine flu epidemic, there had been the early estimates by the World Health Organization was that the case fatality rate was 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
Just like they said with COVID.
Yeah.
But what happened in the swine flu epidemic in 2009 was a whole bunch of scholars ran studies called seroprevalence studies of measuring antibodies in the blood of populations. Antibodies specific to the flu virus that was floating around. And what they found was there were 100 times more infections or more than cases. Because the virus had produced a mild reaction in some people, generating an antibody, and they didn't go into the doctor. No one knew that they had the flu, or had the swine flu, and so the infection fatality rate turned out to be 0.01%.
For swine
flu.
Right. Okay, so that had already been established as a scientific precedent. What do you think the case fatality rate was for COVID?
So I ran a study in April of 2020, a seroprevalence study in Santa Clara County, California. And now we didn't include nursing homes.